Okay, hello everyone. Uh, it seems I've succumbed to the most depraved of desires, the desire to make a tier list video. Basically, this video is probably going to be the longest video ever uploaded to YouTube, as I intend to basically give my thoughts on all the weapons in Gunfire Reborn. There's 46 of them. So the tier list, is more of an excuse just to talk about the weapons, because I think there's a lot to say there. But there's a few caveats to get out of the way before we start. The first is due to how Gunfire Reborn seems to respond to me alt-tabbing in and out, and how it works with my recording software. I am going to have to cut in footage of the tier list itself. I'd like to remain in the game when I talk about the weapons, just so that you guys have something more interesting to look at. I'll be showing you in the logbook the weapons themselves, and they just look a bit nicer there, and they show the stats as well, and a description is there to read for anyone who's not familiar with the weapon. So you'll see some footage probably intercut with the what you're seeing on screen now. Secondly, it's the format in which I'm sort of reviewing these is if I was playing a Reincarnation 7 run, or like a high Reincarnation run, and I found a weapon early on in the run, it'd sort of be what the things I'm considering when I see that weapon. Sort of things to be aware of, and how viable I think it is. You'll notice that the tier list is ranked on viability, and obviously any weapon can be viable with a given run. So you'll have to take all of this with a grain of salt. But in my opinion, some weapons are more viable than others. There are some weapons that require very little there's very few there's very many outs for you to just have that weapon take off and become insane. And then there are other weapons that have very few outs. They are, very hard to build and very rarely viable. Take the names of the tiers just with a grain of salt. And next is just be aware that obviously I don't know everything, so there's undoubtedly going to be stuff in here that I'm mistaken on, and you can only use the weapons that drop in the run. There's no way to test weapons. There's no practice mode in this game, so there's going to be weapons that I've had a less exposure to, or weapons that have recently been patched that I haven't dropped, and I haven't had a chance to use them. So if I get something wrong, that's what the comment section's for. Obviously, feel free to let me know where I went wrong. And lastly is just why you should listen to me. So I've been playing this game for, well, you shouldn't. If you know what's good for you, listen to me. But if you were determined to, I've been playing this game more or less since it came out in early access. You'll see our talent tree. We're at level 163, which is the current highest. Everything's maxed out. And I've completed Reincarnation 7, which is the current hardest difficulty available, on 3 out of the 5 characters once each. So, I'm obviously not the best player. There are people that play on Reincarnation 7, I would assume, and consistently, can consistently beat it. I've done it on 3 out of 5. So, I've been around for a while, and I have a decent knowledge base, but don't know everything, and I'm not the best player. So, we'll see how we go. So let's make a start. So I'm going to start with the melee weapons here. I feel like these are very rarely useful. Rarely viable. If they're ever useful, it'll be on the bird. Just because he's one of the few characters that can stand being right next to the enemy. But I don't ever see a run where I'm happy to see these. Often often I'm only considering them if they have a Gemini inscription to pass on their elemental effect to a different weapon, something like that. Their crit multiplier is not great, so you're not going to be hanging on to it for Gemini crit inscriptions. The primary and secondary fire, the arcs, like the ranges that they swing at, are not particularly amazing. The elemental effect chance is great. Like if you had a run where you just desperately need to proc a particular element at some moment, then maybe you could do it. But yeah, I would consider this rarely viable. Likewise for the Poisonous Ghost, this doesn't even have the higher elemental effect chance. It's only got 30. But apparently I believe the third hit, I don't use these often, but I believe the third hit guarantees the elemental effect, which is nice. And I believe these also increase your movement speed. This may be something that makes them semi-viable, but I believe these will increase your movement speed above your base, like above what the Foundry is. Like the Foundry is basically typically as fast as you can go, but if you've got a sword, you will go faster, which that can make a difference sometimes if you're in a pickle. But like with the first sword, I don't consider the Poisonous Ghost to be particularly useful. I would say rarely viable, if not viable, just because at higher difficulties you really don't want to be anywhere near an enemy. The Fire Tower I have seen placed highly on other people's tier lists. Never got to the end of that video, so I don't know what their justification was, but I've seen it placed high. I suspect it's something to do with elemental synergy. The fire variant works nicely in that when you combine fire and corrosive damage, the resulting explosion status type is 3 times the damage of the hit that procced it, and this weapon is the heavy sword effectively. This is a lot slower and a lot harder hitting than these two, but the damage is higher. So when you proc that status effect, which is very consistent, to get that explosion, if you've already applied corrosive, you will get a very large damage number. So that may be why. But that's so that's swords. I don't consider. I think they're all, rarely viable, in my opinion. Next, we'll go on to the rainbow. I do like this. Has got a very high fire rate, so it can be useful if you've got other like certain scrolls or certain setups. Even certain characters like the rabbit occasionally benefits from hitting enemies many times in very quick succession. All of these, they're called injectors, which is kind of strange, but yeah, I don't know why. They're sort of like laser beam weapons. But the fire rate on this being what it is quite nice. It doesn't even have that wild an elemental effect chance, so even if you find it with an elemental effect, it's not that great. And the fact that if you don't mark the target, it will just lock onto center mass and not do crits. You can't even aim it at the head. You have to actually trigger that lock-on effect to get crits. Means that I very rarely find this useful. So I would honestly consider this not viable. I think it's even worse than the swords probably, because it doesn't even give you movement speed. I almost always avoid this. There are many better weapons than that one. Fire Dragon, however, I would consider consistently viable. This I will almost always consider. I will always read the inscriptions on a Fire Dragon unless I've already got a broken run. I will always consider the stats on this. It's got a high fire rate, which works well with many scrolls, many effects. loads of things benefit from a high fire rate, like an initial high fire rate. Its hitbox is large. Its range is surprisingly good, given that it looks shorter range than it is. I would say that's how I would describe it. And the elemental effect chance is good. The elemental type is fire, which of the three is they're fairly evenly balanced, but I suppose you could make the argument that manipulation is the worst synergy effect, in my opinion. So the only other effect that the fire dragon can trigger is the explosion effect, which multiplying your damage by 3 on a low damage weapon that just hits fast, you could argue that that's not as good, but you know, it's a 3 times multiplier. Whether or not you hit many times, you know, many small hits or one big hit, it's gonna add up. But yeah, always consider this. Reload speed slows it down a little bit, but also high mag. High mag is often quite a good thing to have. There's a lot of scrolls that give you, and effects even, that will give you percentage chances to restore an amount of bullets to the mag. And obviously the bigger your mag, the more time you have to burn through to give that effect a chance to proc and fill your mag back up. So yeah, big fan of the Fire Dragon. Thunderclap Gloves, I would consider these probably situationally viable to rarely viable. I just find them underwhelming. Similar to this, I sort of consider them only... Don't get me wrong, they're better than this. They're better than the Rainbow. But I consider them only when I need many hits in rapid succession. When I've got some sort of synergy that would work really well with that. I don't find this thing can its effect can spread out from one enemy to the next. I don't even find that very useful. It does such little damage. It's so weak that it just feels underwhelming. And you'll find also that being a laser beam, that's like very precise laser beam. It doesn't have the advantage that this has, where it's got a very large, like this, the Fire Dragon has a very large cone of damage. This, you have to be quite specific with it, and you know, for that difficulty of aiming, you get a weak elemental effect chance. It shoots a little bit faster than the 2 previous weapons in this category. It's it's not amazing. Sometimes it'll be saved by certain inscriptions, but yeah, I would consider this, if I had to place it, I would probably say rarely viable. Situationally viable is a bit more of a specific, it's probably the most specific category I have. I consider that to be ones where a weapon is not just, it could be saved by an inscription, because that's true of all weapons. But I consider situationally viable to be things that are, you know, typically very, very good in a common situation. Like, you know, this weapon might be very good on the dog because the dog has explosion synergy. But anywhere else it's bad. Where, you know, if you're on the dog, you really would consider it, and often it would be viable. But anywhere else it's not, which is not quite the same as this, because I don't think there's any particular situation you'd look at this and think, this is coming into its own now. So, and likewise, basically same problem here. It's let me come back to this. This may be saved by miasma. If you can apply your corrosion effectively, the fact that it ticks quickly means there's a chance that if you can somehow get the elemental effect up, you can apply miasma procs, and you can stack miasma 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can get 9 stacks of miasma, and then you'll burn through enemies' health quite quickly. Not good against bosses, unfortunately. So even then, it's got some pretty heavy drawbacks. And so this one isn't even saved by that, unfortunately. The best you're going to get with this is you're going to apply corrosion, and you're going to, similar to the fire dragon, you're going to frequently proc explosions on a small amount of damage, but it's even smaller amounts of damage than the fire dragon, and you've got none of the benefits of the fire dragon. You don't have the large hitbox, you've got a slightly smaller mag, you've got a way worse elemental effect chance. Even the crit multiplier is quite bad, and yeah, it's very similar to Thunderclap Gloves. I consider that to be. I only ever consider it if it's some sort of Gemini synergy to enable another weapon or something to that effect. So yeah, rarely viable. And let's move on to the launches. These, it's going to be more of the same, unfortunately. So we'll start with Justice. I basically never use this. This is one that you're going to have to, your sort of results may vary. Lobbing grenades, inherently it's sort of hard to aim. You have to, they won't trigger themselves. You have to deploy them with a right click, which never really helps. Like the ability to detonate 4 bombs at once, if the bomb just blew up when it hit the enemy the first time, if you just did that 4 times, it would be the same thing. There's no advantage really to detonating the extra grenades all at once. So yeah, not really a fan of this. The only saving grace is that it is an elemental effect weapon, so unlike the other explosion weapons, you have a decent initial damage, and if that damage triggers the explosion status effect, you're going to be multiplying this by 3, which is nice. It's nice that it comes along with explosions. Unfortunately, this adorable little fellow, that explosion status effect won't scale with the dog's status abilities, explosion abilities, sorry. So even on the character that would find the most use out of an explosion hero, that the status effect, being that this is a fire weapon, even that doesn't really get that much use. So yeah, I just find it unwieldy to use. So I would again consider this rarely viable. Bone Dragon, a similar deal. I just find it unwieldy, and often in this game, it's rare that I will look for a weapon that does a single big hit of damage. And the gravity effect often isn't that good that it pulls in many enemies. I would much rather have something that does half the damage and lets me pick off all the enemies wherever they are, rather than trying to somehow, often you're going to have a bandit tactician sniping you in the back. You've got one guy running in from your right, someone off you on back left, and this doesn't really help you with that. Against bosses, there's no elemental synergy here, so you're not going to be using that to beat bosses. Explosion damage against bosses just is inherently underwhelming. It slows you down, your movement speed. I just find it to be a clunky, unpleasant weapon. It can be like if you've got the dog, you can make some of these sort of work, but I wouldn't even consider this situationally good, because on the dog I'd just be looking for other explosion weapons. It might be good on the dog, but the dog's looking for other things. So in that vein, the Shrieker. This weapon is the one weapon that I wish I enjoyed. because I really like it. It feels nice to use, and I think that's worth something. So I would take this a step up from where I think the Bone Dragon is rarely viable again. The Shrieker, I think, is situationally viable. It feels a little bit nicer to use. It's a little bit faster, and it's a little bit, instead of firing this single big shot, you get what I was talking about. You get a slightly smaller but more precision and a little bit speedier deployment of explosions, and you get the advantage of still having, an explosion radius, so it's easier to hit enemies, but without the downside of it being this horribly slow, clunky thing. And I'm told that this, I don't use this much, so I can't speak to it, but I'm told that this will actually pierce enemies and then explode when it hits the ground, that's interesting. There might be something there, but this is one of the ones that I would like to use more. I'd like to get a little bit more out of this, but I think situationally viable for this. Anytime I'm on the dog, I'm trying to get a run going with this. I've sort of talked myself out of it now. I'm kind of thinking rarely viable, just because I can't really speak to any time that I have got it to be situationally viable. But I want it to be situationally viable. But it's teetering somewhere in that middle area between the two. You can see from my usage stats here, it's very underused. Not much in the launcher category at all. You can tell I probably don't play the dog much. Frenzied Shark. This is sort of the opposite of... So this might be the middle ground. This might be the slow, clunky, really heavy hitting thing. This, unfortunately, is the slightly lighter thing. It's a fun weapon to use. It feels nice. Like, it reloads quick, and and you pop off rounds very fast. But the damage is underwhelming. And much like the previous two before it, not having any elemental effect really hurts it. It's very hard to build for reincarnation runs with no elemental effect. Unless you're playing the dog, you're probably not going to be doing explosion. You're not going to have much explosion synergy in your kit. There's not a lot of scrolls. I don't even know if there are any scrolls that help explosive weapons. It's a very, very niche thing that I actually would like the game to sort of include more of, because it's unfortunate that this whole class of weapons is sort of hard to use. But as a general rule, I just find this to be the damage is too small for it to be viable. So I would say rarely viable for this as well. Occasionally it'll be saved by some cool inscriptions, but nothing worth having, if that makes sense. Tiger Cannon. Now this is probably the most exciting of the launches. It does have the same drawbacks as this, but I consider this to be probably the place where it starts to be worth it. It does a lot of damage. It's often got incredibly good inscriptions. If you are playing on the dog, so this is where I would say situationally viable, for sure, because if you're on the dog, you definitely want to be considering it. Anywhere else, it's maybe not. But I have definitely considered this on other characters, like other than the dog. And there's a lot of ways to make this good. Magazines of 1 also benefit from certain scrolls. Anytime you can, you get advanced depot and you don't have to reload, something that does this much damage all on its lonesome is pretty impressive. So there's a lot that can save this, and I think the difference probably is just that it does much more damage than this. Like, that said, maybe it's that I don't use it enough, but I could swear that this doesn't do that much damage. Maybe it's something to do with how the radius works when this explodes, but this feels much more consistently damaging to me than the Bone Dragon ever has. But maybe this is my inexperience when it comes to the explosive weapons. But that's it for these. I would say, yeah, situationally viable for that one, and probably rarely for the rest. The justice is keep an eye on the fact that that's got an elemental thing. It may be of some use to you. Yeah. Alrighty, moving on. Snipers. Snipers are fun. I enjoy this class. Quick scoping in this game is very pleasing, and so a lot of these are good. But let's start on the low end. I feel like, let's actually start here. Let's start with the golden bow. So I feel like the golden bow is probably situationally viable. I wouldn't, because the next step up is consistently viable, and I wouldn't probably go that far. It is held back a little bit by its lack of elemental effect. But if you ever find it with an elemental effect, its proc chance is nice and high. I'm told it's been recently buffed in the patch notes. I have used it once since then, and it felt nice. It felt a little bit better to me, but I think they modified how the crit multiplier charges up as you charge the shot. And so yeah, works well. There's a lot of scrolls that will work well with this, and it being, you know, a weapon without a mag, it gets benefits from some scrolls there. It's quite ammo efficient. It's just a good, solid, middle of the road weapon. But yeah, the lack of elemental effect, I think, holds it back a little bit. But yeah, and especially on the Tiger, the fact that it has the fire rate it does and it doesn't need to reload. This is why I place it in situationally viable at a minimum, because even if I'm not gonna nudge it up there into the consistently viable, at least with the Tiger, being able to trigger lightnings, like recurring lightnings, at the rate that this does, it works quite nicely. Now, this is why I wanted to do that one first. I feel like the Strike Wing is just a worse version. The shards splitting behind the enemies never really mattered to me. It doesn't do enough damage for that to be worthwhile. It doesn't shoot that much faster, if at all. Like, I don't know if I've ever noticed it to... What's the rate of fire? 2? Yeah, it probably is the same rate of fire. Crit multiplier is higher, but the damage is lower, so it's not amazing there. And this one doesn't scale with the charge as far as I know, whereas this one does, which is why this multiplier is lower. That number will eventually go up. So I would say rarely viable on this. Yeah, not a great weapon in my opinion. If you're on the Tiger and you desperately need a sniper rifle, maybe you take it, but that's about it. The Sting is my least favorite weapon in the game, period. I hate this thing. I will never use it. Maybe there's some good uses for it, but I actually hate it. And so I can't speak to its viability. I can't speak to its quality. I would put this in not viable 10 times out of 10. I don't like that it fires 3 shots, then 2 shots, then 1 shot. It doesn't really work very well with, you know, because as you're playing that weapon, you're kind of, you know, in an ideal world, you'd be getting the benefits of what those shots do, right? So you'd be firing the single shot that shatters shields or whatever it is. Yeah, the single shot that shatters shields at this particular enemy, and you'd be firing the 3 shots over at this particular enemy. But in reality, you don't have the luxury of doing that. You just have to shoot at whatever's coming at you. So you just have this very inconsistent, odd sort of fire rate for no real benefit. So, yeah, not a fan of this weapon. It also has, I think, it's got a scope with no zoom, or it's in the sniper class with no zoom, which is very strange. I'd only ever take it if I was just... Even sometimes when I'm desperate for corrosive, I've avoided this weapon because I dislike the way it feels that much. Maybe try it, see how you feel. I will never take it. It just feels too hard, too horrible to use. The bloody drill is a weird one for me. I feel like early in a run, this ultimately it's rarely viable. It's hard to say because ideally it needs to be situationally viable, but with different connotations than what situationally means in this sense. But obviously, being a sniper, it has all the benefits of a sniper, but I never feel like the bleed is going to deal enough damage to outright kill an enemy without the armor. If I found the shot that lets you deal direct damage, then the shot that headshots deal damage through armor, or 50% damage through armor, I might take this, because then the bleed has a chance to tick them the rest of the way and kill them. But I just feel, and especially how slow this weapon is, yeah, I think it's rarely viable. It's got a fun little gimmick, and it's a cool looking weapon. But unless you just need a big hit of damage, which this can do, but even then, like, its high crit multiplier is hampered by the fact that they really dropped the damage down because it has a bleed, I guess. And unfortunately, that bleed doesn't synergize at all with any elemental effects. It doesn't have an inherent elemental effect, so it's missing out on a lot of things. We've done the golden bow. Woodpecker is next. This, I would say, is consistently viable. There's a lot of times that you can get this working well. It shoots incredibly quickly. If it rolls a status effect, it's extremely good because you've got 30 elemental effect chance on a weapon that shoots fast. Decent sized mag. Obviously, it's got a scope, so you can, you can line up important shots across the map. Sometimes, this is something I think is sort of undervalued on snipers, is that sometimes you really do need to kill something very far away now. Like, you don't have time to dodge and weave your way over there, kill them, and then come back. Especially at high reincarnations, you a lot of the time end up, you've been hit low, you're behind cover, and you need to kill an enemy that's a very fucking long way away before you can move out of it, but you don't want to, go traipsing across the map because you've just been knocked really low on HP. And so, yeah, the more I play, like, taking, 2 short range weapons, they need to be stomping for me to do that. But yeah, very good weapon. Very good weapon. It's just a fast, solid, like, your basic, like, marksman rifle, or the DMR from Halo, like a good, quick single shot, high damage, just nice. Like, just a good chap. All right, the Goshawk. I thought I hated this, but the more I thought about it, the more I actually like this weapon. I don't know if I like it enough to put it in consistently viable. I think this would be a situationally viable, and I think I'm comfortable putting it there. Because it's great damage. Like it's some of the higher damage in all of the sniper rifles. Its elemental effect chance, it shoots too slow for that to really matter. You're probably not going to bother even if it did roll into an elemental ability. But the high crit and the high damage is good, and the fact that you have to charge the shot, it kind of doesn't matter. Like when you scope in to shoot at an enemy, unless they're right in front of you, you're going to take a second to aim it at an enemy's head anyway. So it does slow you down. Like it'll slow you down a bit, but it's not as detrimental as, as I think I thought when I first started using this weapon. I was like, charge shots. And then I swore off it for, hours and hours and hours of playtime. And eventually I came back and this is good, especially on the Tiger. Obviously on the Tiger, single heavy hits are even better. And so I would say situationally good, because on the Tiger I will 100% be given this, proper thought. I'll be looking at the stats, looking at the inscriptions, really getting in and trying to see what's good. On other heroes, it would depend on my build. If I had something that was going to benefit from a single big hit, then maybe. But yeah, I would say situationally viable. Double caliber. This one's tough for me. This one's very tough for me. Because I rarely see a run. I feel like it has to be situationally viable again. It's kind of similar. It occupies the same area code in my brain as the Goshawk does. Because you're not going to be using it for elemental effects. You're only going to be using it for single big hits of damage. But it's very consistent. It's kind of a mix between the Goshawk and the Woodpecker. It hits harder than the Woodpecker. It's faster and more easy to aim than the Goshawk. It refunds ammo, which is only really an issue early on, and even then, it's almost not that big an issue. But every time I pick this, I'm happy with it. I find it to be very reliable, very easy to use. The inscriptions are always, just whatever. Like I've never had it just be something crazy mental. But yeah, I would say situationally viable in the same way that the Goshawk is. That if you have anything at all that's going to help you, that's going to work with these two weapons, consider them. Whereas the Woodpecker, I think, is consistently viable because, this will work not only on the Tiger, but also on other heroes as well, just because it's got that extra fire rate. And yeah. Next, we have the Piercing Flame. The inherent PS is okay. You basically won't really care about it until like after you've left the first stage, after you've left the Longing Tomb, just because it's not that great. Great elemental effect chance, and it works very nicely being a high damage sniper, in that if you can apply corrosion and then swap to this, the shot you fire is likely to trigger the effect that's going to cause explosion. Therefore, you'll be getting the 3 times damage multiplier, and it's a sniper rifle, so it's got a high crit chance. It's going to deal high damage on that explosion hit. That said, it shoots quite slow, so the higher your reincarnation, the less this is gonna. It's probably not going to be enough. A single big explosion is often not enough to do it in the really high reincarnations. So I would say this is situationally viable, consistently viable, because I do like it, and I do any run that's not set up already. I will consider this, and it often has inscriptions that can help it, and its hip fire is actually quite nice. Like it's quite usable from the hip. So yeah, and the fact that it comes with that elemental effect chance because it's also more or less the only sniper that's got an elemental effect that's a traditional sniper. The Sting's the only other one with an elemental effect, and it doesn't have magnification. So, and it also doesn't function like this. Well, these three are actually the only ones that function like traditional snipers. Just an aim, you zoom in and you shoot. The Goshawk is close. But yeah, I've got a lot of usage on this. It's decent. My hit rate is apparently 100.10%. How? Odd. Wonder why that is. Anyway, alright. Shotguns. Alrighty. This is a fun one as well. Alright, so let's start with the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt I consider, honestly, I'm inclined to say not viable. It's either not viable or rarely. The only time this is good is, in my opinion, is if you've got advanced depot, and honestly, half the weapons on the roster can be saved by advanced depot. The duplex trigger, the press down to fire, release to fire the second, is more annoying than anything, and so often only having those two shots. If you're close to an enemy, sometimes you'll try and swing your gun around, and you'll just miss the headshot. You'll accidentally release the duplex trigger, and you'll waste your second shot, and then you're right next to an enemy. You can't shoot, and you're just having a bad day. There's no elemental effect inherent to it. If you do get an elemental effect, the status chance is low, though it is a shotgun. So, it's 8% times 12, which is, you're likely to trigger at least one of them. But still, not the greatest. If you can get advanced depot, you can spam the shit out of this thing and just have a wall of lead. But even then, it's using heavy ammo. So, do you really want that? Yeah, so I don't know. I consider this not viable. I basically, unless it's like the first room and I've picked this up and I'll just use it until I find something better, I'm avoiding the Wild Hunt. Porcupine. Roadhog wants his gun back. This thing's nice. I consider this weapon a utility weapon. It's not too bad. Just to apply corrosive at range. So sometimes that's not inconceivable that you would use that. So I would say situationally viable for a different reason than most. I would say situationally viable is sort of like a secondary weapon. Because often, just applying, its primary fire has great range. You can get a corrosive status applied with, fairly high consistency. You've got projectiles 15 by 10. The way the primary fire works means that you're not likely to hit even close to all of them on a target at range, because it sort of shoots a pellet that then explodes. And so, if the person that it hits, if it hits and it explodes out, all of these pellets that are exploding away from the enemy, have been wasted. So that's not great. But yeah, so I would never, I basically never use this weapon. Actually, I don't think I ever have, ever. used this weapon as a weapon. I've used it as a device for applying corrosive, and that's it. That's the only time I've ever used this weapon. But that's something that you may need to do. And as a device for applying corrosive, it worked quite well. Like, it shoots fast. It's got decent elemental effect chance. It's got, I say good range in the sense that, you know, it functions well at range. So this, you know, situationally. Moving through it. The order is making sense in my head, so you'll have to just forgive me for jumping around. Hell. This one's a weird one. I find this one often has very good inscriptions. This is frequently saved by its inscriptions, and is frequently enough to carry you through the early game. But it does. I find it drops off. So I would again say situationally viable, just for runs where you need. You just need something to get you through the start of it. Like, you haven't found a decent weapon in the early rooms. You're sort of struggling. And you find this, you know, it uses heavy ammo, so it hits hard. The way that it reloads, like, it reloads one round at a time, and you can fire at any moment. That's not particularly useful. It's just sort of a quirk of the weapon. It's just sort of you just, you know, take note of it. The piercing, again, is you're never going to take it just because it's got piercing. It's just a nice to have. And it doesn't have an inherent elemental effect. So hard to sort of give this much more than a situational, but it does hit hard. And so, you know, if I'm looking at, you know, but basically put it this way, at higher reincarnations, doing a lot of damage is important. The enemies are very, very tanky at higher reincarnations, and so taking something that's just a big dumb hit of damage is often, these mosquitoes, man, I'm gonna lose my mind. It is often going to be much better for you than the cool, intelligent little status applying thing, at least early on, because and especially early on, the weapons don't really matter, because, you know, if a weapon's got 2 inscriptions, it's only going to have 3 inscriptions once you etch it. Alrighty, sorry about that. Recording software decided to have a fit. But yeah, a weapon's only going to have 3 inscriptions. If it started off with 2 once you etch it, so there's no real reason to spend heaps of money on it. So, you know, you might as well, you know, if that thing's going to be weak until you upgrade it, but you don't want to upgrade it, then you might as well just take this because it's stronger and use this to get you through the first couple of rooms, and, you know, grab something better than this later. So yeah, situationally viable for that one. The Argus, unless you're playing the really high reincarnations, I would say this is consistently viable. I've always had a great time with this weapon. It's easy to hit. It's easy to hit with. It, for whatever reason, I seem to see this with elemental inscriptions all the freaking time, and I don't know why. But it takes an elemental inscription really nicely. Works really well on this weapon. The damage is decent. The projectiles are good. It's easy to aim. Decent mag size. Just a nice, consistent shotgun. No elemental damage inherently. Sort of holds it back a little bit. That's what stopped me using it in the higher ascensions. But on my way up through the you know, on normal, elite, even nightmare, I frequently used this and found it to be good. So yeah, I would say, unless you're doing reincarnations, probably, I would say it's a good weapon. Like, and I make the distinction for the Argus where I didn't make it for some of these other ones, because I've always found some of them mediocre, but the Argus is one of the few weapons where I thought it was good, and I've not been able to use it lately. Like, it definitely did its job at lower reincarnations or lower difficulties, and it doesn't anymore. It doesn't do enough now for me to. So in the context of this review, I would honestly say rarely viable, because it doesn't even have the single hit that the Hell does, like the single big hit for the early game. So, but that's honorable mention for that one. Honorable mention. All right, now moving on. This is our first always viable, in my opinion. I say always viable. That's just the name of the tier, or what I chose to name this tier. But I kind of think it is. This weapon is incredible, to the point that there are a few weapons that I'm not so sure, but up until very recently, I actually thought this needed a nerf. And I'm not one for calling for nerfs, but it just felt like it was just so oppressively good that, yeah, I don't know. It's an incredible weapon. If you're not using this, start. Basically, it has no elemental effect chance, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it's not also going to take an elemental effect as well as other weapons. It's got lower projectiles, I think, than most of the other ones, except for the Argus, right? That's 12. Oh, that's 10 as well. That's 12. Yeah, so it's a little on the lower side projectile-wise, but it's got a much lower elemental effect chance than the other ones as well. So it doesn't take an elemental effect as well. But just having a shotgun with high rate of fire that... I didn't actually know it increases projectiles as it fires. That makes sense, though. But yeah. Having a high rate of fire specifically, for whatever reason, it just enables this weapon to leverage lots of different scrolls, lots of different ascensions on heroes. There are so many different things that just synergize really nicely with this weapon. That and it's inherently just, it does really nice damage. You often will find it with an inscription that mitigates its fire rate problems. Like, it's when you first start shooting it, it shoots quite slow. And there's often ways to fix that with, scrolls, ascensions, the weapon's inscriptions itself. A truly, truly impressive gun. In my opinion, there's only three weapons, I think, that are in always viable, and this is one of them. There might be a fourth, but yeah, this is one of them. And this is the other one. This is my favorite weapon in the game. Every time I see this, I am a very happy person. Hands down my favorite. Love using it. Love the way it works. Love what it enables you to do. Love how viable it is. So where do we start? So I actually don't know where to start. So it's a high damage gun. Like, it's got great damage. Charging its shot increases the spread and takes it from being effectively a shotgun into it works at range, which is just, that's nuts all on its own. So it's a shotgun that works really well at range. Fully charging it increases your damage by 50%, which is, again, insane. It's got decent projectiles. It's got a slightly higher crit multiplier, I think, than the other shotguns. That one's 2. That one's 2. That one's 2. That one's 2. And that one's 2. So Slightly higher crit multiplier on an already strong weapon, which that's crazy. When you're not charging the shots, you can shoot it fairly fast. That's possibly the area that could use a little bit more. Like, well, I say a little bit more. It's already oppressively good, but like that's probably its worst area is maybe its fire rate. But that's fine. It's got a big mag, which is, again, that's great. And possibly the most obscene thing about it is it deals shock damage. And being a shotgun that has an elemental effect, you will note that there's only two. There's the Porcupine and the Pupil, and the Porcupine really has trouble applying its stuff somewhat. Like it's good at range and it can shoot quickly, but I shouldn't say it has trouble applying its status. It applies its status well, but it won't apply many stacks of the same status, just because the projectiles, like I said, they blast away from the enemy. Whereas it's possible for this, because they're all clumped together, and so again, we're doing 10 projectiles by... This is 12 projectiles when you have it, when you incorporate the... not player information. There's a talent here for projectiles. So 12 projectiles times 10% chance. So you've got quite a good chance for at least a couple of those projectiles to apply the shock effect. And, you know, if your enemy's standing in corrosion or they've already had corrosion applied, you're applying multiple miasma ticks to that enemy, which, you know, that's amazing. Unfortunately, it's only miasma. You're not really going to ever want... Like, you can't apply multiple stacks of manipulation, and you wouldn't want to. So it's held back a little bit by that. But just its inherent, like, oppressive amounts of damage are enough to make up for that. So yeah, very strong weapon. Definitely my favorite. Just as well because of how it feels when you use this thing. Like, to be able to charge up a shot and have the reticule suck into this pinpoint thing, and then to know that you're about to fire, you know, a massive chunk of pellets all in this one tight little, you know, it's the dream, right? Having a shotgun that doesn't spread. Like, it's glorious. So yeah, definitely, in my opinion, always viable. I have to stop myself taking this just so the runs aren't all the same, because this can carry so many runs. So many runs. Oops. Oh my god. Alrighty. Pistols next. Actually, I'm gonna do pistols last. Pistols is fun. So what do we got? Submachine guns, rifles, and pistols. Nice. Alrighty. So the big hippo. This guy is this is a tough one. I think it's firmly in situational. It slows you down, which isn't good. So it's tempting to put it in not viable. Rarely viable. But having a mag as big as this thing has can synergize really well with a lot of different things. Like, there's a lot of scrolls that will work with it. The dog for dual wielding has some advantages to having something that you can constantly fire. So yeah, I would say situational to rare. In the higher reincarnations, it's not doing enough that it's sort of like enabling other things, if that makes sense. It's not really doing its own impressive thing. It's fair to use, you know, the damage when you fire it, if you're hitting headshots, you know, it feels like it's hitting about as hard as it should, but it's nothing overwhelming. So yeah, I pretty low down. I would say situational on maybe the dog every now and again. I don't even find the inscriptions on this thing to be particularly whelming. Yeah, so not too sure about that one. The cavalry, I don't think I've taken this in like a year. I don't think I've touched this in so long. I just consider this not viable at all. Like it's unpleasant to use. It's kind of slow and clunky. It's a 3-shot burst weapon that doesn't really even have a better crit multiplier. It doesn't come with an elemental effect chance, and even if it did, its elemental effect chance is okay, but it shoots 3-shot bursts, so you have to like continuously, it's not even, what I'm saying is it's not fully automatic. You're constantly being interrupted when you fire it. So yeah, I don't know. Not a fan. Not a fan at all. Like, yeah, I would go so far as to say completely not viable. I would never touch it. Rainbow Arch is, for some reason, one of my favorite weapons. I really enjoy this thing. It doesn't take an elemental effect well. It doesn't have a very high crit, and its damage is mediocre, and it's just a normal assault rifle, really. It's just that holding right click, charging up his shot, it converts, I think it's like 8 shots into one big shot, and it works really well. I haven't used this on higher reincarnations though, so I think very much the Rainbow Arch is very much the same boat as the Argus. It is really, really nice to use, really, really consistent, like really just solid all round decent weapon, but it falls off massively in the higher reincarnations, just because it's not doing enough. The only person who really gets use from it later on is the Tiger, and there are sniper rifles in the game, so you just try and find one of them, really. And also something to be said about it feels really nice to use. But yeah, it's and I've never really seen it come with inscriptions that are particularly astounding either. But its charge shot is nice, and its charge shot feels like really good damage. Like, it feels really nice. It accumulates enough damage that you one-shot most things in the early game, like in the Longing Tomb, which is important. Sometimes that's that's I think the problem with a lot of the fully automatic weapons is just your inability to deal with big threats quickly, and that can find a way around it. Next we have the Crimson Fire Scale. This one, so yeah, sorry, this would be yeah, again, I would say consistent in the lower reincarnations, but in the higher difficulties, probably rarely viable, unfortunately. Honorable mention. Love this gun. And the color is just perfect. Alright, Crimson Fire Scale. This thing, often I take it because I need it, but I hate using it. It's really inaccurate, and the recoil is horrible, and the spread is just nasty. Like, the way it fires is just not fun. But being fully automatic and having a 12% elemental effect chance is decent. If you need to proc fire, it procs fire. The fireballs are good. Sometimes there's a big threat. And, similar to what I was saying with this, this gives you that option to, like, you're shooting enemies, and then something with a shield pops up, and you're like, I'm not going to chew through that shield in time to avoid the damage. So you hit it with the right click, and, you've got a decent explosion there that can dish out some damage. But outside of that, yeah, I just find it sort of mediocre. I only take it for... So again, I'm putting this in... situational. Like, I'm using it more as a tool to apply the fire effect than anything else. So yeah, But I wouldn't go so far as to say rarely viable, because you could build around this if you got it early and make a pretty good run out of it, right? Like, it does a lot of, it's got a good damage type. It's fully automatic. Like, high fire rate is good in weapons. Decent sized mag, it's got a secondary ability that's useful to you. It's got decent elemental effect chance. So you can build around this, but I think just the way that it fires and the way that it shoots is sort of unpleasant. So I rate it possibly a little lower than it deserves, maybe. Yeah. Dragon Chaser, something I used a lot early on, similar to this. You can see like 2.88%, 2.7%. I took these at a similar rate. Unfortunately, though, it dropped off in the late reincarnations, and in the early reincarnations, it was never as good as this or the Argus. Whoops. So, unfortunately, yeah, it just doesn't really do what you need it to do. The elemental effect chance is quite poor. It's got the same targeting annoyance that the Rainbow had, and you probably remember how I feel about that weapon. So, yeah, it's falling down in many different areas. It's got a slightly higher crit multiplier, but the damage isn't there to make that worthwhile. Yeah, no elemental effect type. Weak, just fully automatic weapon. Just mediocre. I would say rarely viable, honestly. There's not even a situational time where I'd be happy with this. Lightning Blast. Again, this is similar to the Crimson Fire Scale or the Porcupine, is that I will use it more like a tool than anything else. I would say situationally viable, but only ever as a secondary. I would never use this really as a primary weapon. Its right click is okay. I treat the right click as a nice to have. If I'm using this weapon for other reasons, I might occasionally drop out the right click just for some more damage, but I'm never taking it because of its right click. It's the ability to increase damage by 50% when you've undoubtedly got a bunch of scrolls and abilities that you're already doing, plus 350%, an extra 50 on that. It's not going to make your day. But it's got a big mag and it shoots reasonably quickly with a high elemental effect chance, which is nice. If you need to apply lightning, it does that job and it does it well. Early on, getting through Lu Wu, the boss, this will help you out there quite nicely. But yeah, other than that, the damage isn't amazing, and the projectiles are very slow. So this is another weapon that's quite hard to use, just because of how it fires. So unfortunately, yeah, I consider this situational, just as a secondary, just some tool to occasionally apply lightning, or very early in a run. Okay, that's all of those. Nice. Submachine guns. I thought this was a pistol. Interesting. Didn't realize that was a submachine gun. Alrighty. Concealed ammo. So this one I would say rarely useful. I'm under the impression that there's something you can do with this that breaks the game, like it just turns it into a broken weapon. But yeah, maybe I'm not creative enough to have encountered that. But yeah, I would say rarely useful. Its crit multiplier is nice. So early on, you can extract some decent damage out of this. But it's got a little bit of anti-synergy with itself. The fact that if you're shooting, you've consumed a lot of ammo that you would then, basically, when you right-click, whatever ammo is left in the mag is turned into damage on the explosion that it deals. And so you're either right-clicking constantly or shooting and wasting your right-click damage. So I find it, yeah, it just doesn't work very nicely like that. You know, maybe on the dog you find some use for it, but even then, like, explosion range isn't very nice. It's, yeah, not something that I ever get use out of. Again, no elemental effect, so decent rate of fire though, and it's consistent as well. If you need something early on, it will sort of, it'll let you leverage if you've got decent aim or whatever. You know, it'll let you, chew up some headshots and cruise through the early stage well enough. But it's not gonna be a good run, I don't think. Star Devourer. So this one I like. Fun mechanic as well. I like the way that it. This is the only weapon in the game that reloads by not firing it, which is nifty. Deals lightning damage, which is great. High fire rate plus lightning damage means it's a great contender for applying miasma. 10% elemental effect chance is, it's not ideal. But because you've got the high fire rate, if you can find a way to fix the ammo of this thing, you can get some good miasma work out of it. One of the problems we will face with it, though, and probably the reason that I would put this in situational as well, it's not often consistently viable. Well, nah, maybe I would put it in consistently viable. You can almost always use this to some effect. And I've built runs around this. But one of the problems it does have is that other weapons you can increase your reload speed, or you can do things to mitigate reload. This thing, once it runs out of ammo, if you keep you have to actively make yourself stop shooting, whereas other weapons, you don't have to ever learn the muscle memory of not stopping shooting because it'll force you to reload. Whereas this one will eventually just, it'll get down to very, very low and then start shooting incredibly slowly. And so you have to be cognizant of that. But again, it's similar to this in the way that it sort of fires and works, but it's got that elemental effect on top of that, which is nice. And also a decent sized magazine, so you can often synergize with anything that works well with a big mag. Which there's some scrolls that work nicely with that. So yeah, I would say consistently viable on that. I may be over selling this one, considering how harsh I was to some of these. Like, honestly, this might be consistently viable. Yeah. But moving on. This recently, I basically, as far as I'm concerned, it was not viable. But it recently got a buff in the patch, and I haven't seen anyone talk about it at length, but I've seen a run that used it. And in that run, it was very strong. Incredibly high fire rate. So I would say situationally useful now, just because I know certain builds function incredibly well with high fire rate stuff. But on its own merits, other than on a build that's ready for it, it's just a fast shooting, fairly, middle of the road sort of weapon. No elemental effect, just quick shooting. Even the mag is what probably holds this back, because as fast as it shoots, the mag size is low in this particular one. So yeah, not ideal, but fun because it shoots so fast. Now the Dual Fang, this is a super weird one. So this one fires fire and corrosive. It's the only weapon in the game. Well, actually, no, there is a second one, but it doesn't really work the same. It's one of two weapons in the game that can deal multiple damage types within itself. But to make up for that powerful ability, you have to charge it to fire it. But this, I would say, is easily consistently viable. Possibly, this could almost be always viable, because that's a very strong ability. The only reason I say it isn't always viable is because unless you get some scrolls and some inscriptions that are helping this thing along, it's really kind of annoying to use. Like, it fires quick, but not not that quick, and it takes time to like charge up when you first use it, and it burns through a lot of ammo, so you need to like fix the ammo for it. So it wants a little bit of supporting components. But if having fire and corrosive applied on the same thing means you can consistently trigger explosions. So it's a very good weapon. It's a very good weapon. Consistently dealing explosion damage that's enough for it to be worthwhile, even regardless of the other stuff I was saying. Like that's valuable. And then if you can get a gem, like my recent run on the cat had a Gemini inscription providing it with lightning damage. So this thing can, on its own, can deal every status type in the game, that's the only weapon in the game that can do that without swapping its fire modes constantly. So very impressive weapon, but it requires a little bit to get it going, which is why I would consider it consistently viable, because any run that picks it up might take a while before it takes off, and you might die in that while. Whereas the other always viable weapons will basically, as soon as you get them, they will make sure your run becomes good if it's not already. So I think that's the distinction there. Demon Lore. Very little use of this. This is one of the later unlocked weapons. It comes from killing lobsters with fire, which, because lobsters are on the 3rd zone, you encounter less of them, and they're also a rare enemy. So I haven't used this that much. I've probably had 2 runs where I use it, but I happen to think it's very good. Deals fire damage, which is great. It's a good damage type to deal. It's sort of middle of the road for a submachine gun as far as like mag, damage, and crit go, and fire rate. Like, that's all about on par. But this, as a submachine gun, the advantages of this is it does have an elemental effect. It's a good elemental effect. And its passive ability is damage increased for each crit until reloaded. Now, there's a lot of ways. So in the same way that there are a lot of ways to get benefits from large mag size, there's a lot of ways to sort of, okay, maybe not a lot, but there are decent ways to get around reloading. Like certain scrolls will do it. Any ammo that's refunded into the mag will increase the time before a reload, so that's good. Alrighty, sorry about that. Again, recording software's having some serious problems tonight. But yeah, so there are ways that you can get this weapon to just permanently tick up damage, and also it rewards you for something that you're going to be doing anyway, which is lovely. You should be aiming for headshots, so you'll be getting rewarded there. And if you get crits engaged through scrolls or whatnot, you'll get benefits there. So yeah, really, really good weapon. Good weapon. I would say consistently viable. If I were to use this more, from what I know now, I would say this is pretty close to being always viable. I just don't have the experience with this to say for sure, because I haven't used it that much. The scalpel, again, consistently viable. This is one of the few weapons that has no elemental effect. It's surprisingly good. It's got a high crit chance. It shoots incredibly fast, and it's possible to shoot twice the amount of shots for twice the amount of ammo. So it sort of what's the way to explain it? Burns through the mag quicker, but you do more damage while you're doing it. So depending on what you're after, that can actually be something worth doing. Like you might want to shoot for a longer time at lower damage, or you might want to just burn through all your ammo very quickly and do as much damage as possible. And you know, the run, what you go for will differ based on the run. The recoil on it is annoying. For a gun that's called the Scalpel and it's supposed to be precise, it's kind of dumb to me that I understand that it gets more accurate as you shoot. That's fine. But the fact that it gets more accurate as you shoot, but the crosshairs like recoiling all over the place, just seems silly to me, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, I would say consistently viable, which is strange for a weapon of this type. But yeah, a lot of it works well with a lot of scrolls as well. Like again, high fire rate, it works very nicely with a lot of different things. So yeah, not much to say on that one though. But I think it's a good weapon. And that's all of these done. So over to the pistols. So the last ones. Oof. Alrighty. So Sunder. I spent most of my time with the game never using this. Recently I've come around though. This gets mad points for being one of the coolest sounding weapons in the game. So definitely check that out when you get a sec. If it rolls an elemental effect, it's got great chances because its projectile splits multiple times. So I'm not actually sure if that divides this elemental effect chance by the projectile, because the projectile splits and it doesn't actually say how many projectiles it's got, like a shotgun would. So I don't know if it multiplies it, but I think it does. Its damage is great. It's got a slightly higher than normal crit multiplier. So yeah, it's very much a traditional shotgun. You really do need to be close to enemies, so that's pulling it back a bit. I treat this like the hell. Great, just big dumb hit of damage if you can get close to an enemy. Tapers off later in the game, so probably situationally viable. Early run sort of thing. If you get great inscriptions and stuff, it can definitely scale into the late game though. But yeah, I would say as a general rule, it's just somewhere in that middle sort of situationally viable sort of area. The Prism. Again, another single mag weapon. So that synergizes nicely with certain scrolls. Great elemental effect chance. This I treat a bit like a tool. It's good to just apply consistent corrosive damage. It can pierce, but I don't know if that's worth taking it just for that. It's just a nice to have type deal. But yeah, the rate of fire holds this thing back from true greatness because it is quite slow. But decent damage, decent crit. It's just a little bit slow, but it applies elements fairly consistently. You want to speed it up though. 30% is only good if you're shooting at a faster rate than this. So yeah, you definitely want to try and pump that up a little bit. But yeah, I would say this is a tough one because I would say consistently situational rather than situationally viable. It's often a secondary pick of mine, but I would say situational on this one. It's a good secondary. You're not gonna try and build around it all the time. Glimmering. This is slightly more situational. So again, good damage type. The fact that it explodes means it's great on the dog. Having a fire weapon is handy, but having a fire weapon that synergizes with all his explosions is really good. But other than that, its stats are kind of mediocre. So, it shoots slow like the Prism does. It's not got better crit multiplier. Its damage is kind of low. But this is the hit damage. I don't think that incorporates the explosion damage. So again, this hits a little bit harder than the Prism. But yeah, it's... Unfortunately, the elemental effect chance is not where it needs to be. It may have a chance to do elemental effect on the explosion as well. I'm not too sure about that. But this is one of the ones that I wish was better, because like I do take it quite a bit. I just find it... I never take it and turn it into a run. I always just take it and use it for a little while, and then I'm done with it, and it you know, it did its job, sort of thing. The Talisman next. So this is the other weapon that can do all 3 damage types. Uniquely, this weapon also homes in on headshots or weak spots, which is very strange. No other weapon does that outside of sniper rifle inscriptions. So it's, yeah, very strange weapon. I didn't realize it homed in on enemies' heads until like 3 days ago, so I never used this. Now that I know that, I'm considering doing some more runs with it. I want to give it a go. It definitely needs rate of fire fixes. It's very slow, which, yeah, that's holding it back. And I really do like it as a Gemini inscription that provides elemental effect, because you could take it out and swap it to the other elemental effects that you need to synergize with based on what you currently need in the moment. So, you know, for example, as you're going through the stage, you might have it set to lightning so that it's applying miasma to your corrosive weapon. But then you might swap it to fire so that when you're on the boss, you deal explosion damage, you know, which is a bit better against the boss. So, yeah, I would say rarely viable at this point, just because it's only got this one particular use, and even then there are easily other ways to do that. But depending on how I feel when I use this, I may reverse myself on that, because it might, like its damage. And basically my question is, can you fix rate of fire enough to make it good? Because yeah, that if you can, then it might be good. Thunderstorm, I think not viable, honestly. I've never enjoyed using this. It's very slow. It's got a small mag. I think it was bugged on its right click, so that may be fixed. So keep watching for that. But yeah, its right click detonating shields, like, it's a lightning weapon, so it already does good damage against shields. So why do you care about detonating them? And I say detonating as in like shattering them. It's not that it does more damage on shields. Yeah, its rate of fire is abysmal. It doesn't even hit that hard. Like, yeah, I don't know. I've tried to like it. It's just never really done anything good for me. I don't even take it for the elemental effect chance, just because it shoots so slow that even the 20% isn't that good. So, and especially being a lightning weapon, you're trying to apply miasma. You want to be applying lots of procs. So a slow lightning weapon is even more egregious. So yeah, really not a fan of Thunderstorm. Aura of Venom, easily consistently viable. Possibly even always viable. It's a very strong weapon. Its right click, being able to fully deplete the mag, is, if you can apply fire to an enemy and then right click with this thing, that's insane. Because this weapon has a 40% elemental chance on a weapon that shoots quick, which is nuts. I think, like, its stats alone on that should probably make this an always always viable. It's got a great crit multiplier as well. It deals a good damage type, like corrosion's one of the better damage types. Like it slows enemies down, which gives you, an inherent sort of safety, and it synergizes in the two good ways. Like it synergizes miasma and explosion, which are both great. Just very impressive weapon. For it to really truly shine, you need to set it up with some other stuff though. Like it's a very strange weapon to build with, because it kind of functions like a tool more than it functions as a primary weapon. Like it functions as one of the best tools, but until you get the perfect setup, it's just colossally powerful. It just sort of, does a tool sort of job. But then if you do get that perfect setup, it just becomes insane. Like this was another one of the ones that carried. So a pupil carried one of my reincarnation 7 runs, and this carried one of the other ones. So yeah, and the dual fang carried the third one. So you can tell why I value the dual fang and the pupil and the aura of venom so highly. Second to last, this is my most used weapon, 11%. This is my highest usage. That's partly because back when the game first came out, this is one of the early weapons, and so I used it a lot back when there wasn't as diverse a weapon pool. But really good weapon, and it synergizes in a lot of different ways. So I would honestly say this is a contender for always viable as well. I'm going to say consistently viable, just because I've never had a run with this weapon that's been like crazy, amazing, powerful. Like I've only had runs that are just real good, like real solid. But I'm sure you can do that with this. But yeah, so its bullets cause explosions. So, which is, you don't really notice that they're technically explosions when you use it, but when you use it with the dog and increase your explosion radius, you will notice. It shoots quick, it's accurate, and it's got a great crit multiplier and good damage. So it's like a mini sniper almost. Like you're just constantly just popping heads, which is just very satisfying to use and very consistent, decent damage. Elemental effect chance is 25, and it's a fast shooting weapon, so that's good. It's got the good elemental effect type, and because it's got a high crit multiplier and damage, if you trigger the elemental effect, which you're likely to do, it's going to be a big number that's multiplied by 3, because if you deal explosion damage. So again, that works really nicely. Really good all-round consistent gun. Don't really have any negatives to say about it. I guess it's semi-automatic, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, no, really, really good weapon, and fun to use, like very enjoyable to use. Because in this game, heads are pretty big, so it's not that hard to hit headshots. So it's fun to just walk around and just pop, 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 pop. Very nice. And the very last weapon, the Foundry. This glorious son of a bitch. Always viable. And I'm not even joking. People make up tier lists, and all the way down at the bottom, it's like S, A, B, C, D, Foundry. And it's like, that's not fair. That's brutal. This weapon deserves respect. This weapon's always there for you. It's always got your back. Infinite ammo. It's constantly being used as a tool to open doors and save you ammo in all these different places. The amount of times that you knock an enemy really low and then you have to reload, and instead you just pop this out and just hit them a couple of times in the head and they're dead. This weapon is it always being there, always having this little baby on the backup is it deserves some respect. I think I'm sentimental about the Foundry. I really like it. But yeah. Yep. So anyway, that's the end of this tier list. I guess if I put some footage of a tier list behind, up for you guys to see, then it'll be official. But we'll see how it goes, I guess. Anyway, cool. So that took me what, 2.5 hours? Damn. All right. Anyway, thank you for sticking through it if you are here, and yeah, if you've got any thoughts or any weapons that you think I've underrated and maybe I need to play them a bit more, let me know, because yeah, I'm interested if there was somewhere that I that I didn't give credit where it was due. I would actually like to know, because I know that there are some weapons I've overlooked since the start, and need to give them another chance. This one, when they patch it, is my first target. But yeah, so thank you. I hope you liked the video, and I'll see you on the next one. All right, enjoy.